To Zanarkand, a Final Fantasy X fan-made audiobook project. Chapter 6: The Summoner of Besaid. The temple doors eased shut behind them with a low, rumbling finality, leaving Tidus and Wakka standing in the cool night air. The village was silent. Only the distant hush of waves reaching up from the cliffs and the soft rustle of palm leaves stirred by the occasional breeze. The moon hung low, nearly full, bathing the village in silver light that softened the edges of the huts and the dirt paths between them. Wakka stretched, his shoulders cracking audibly in the quiet. Man, feels good to get out of there, yeah? He glanced sideways at Tidus with a grin, though it lacked some of the usual energy. Long night. Tidus shifted on his feet, still processing everything. So, she's really a summoner now? He asked, hoping it would prompt some answers from Wakka. I was expecting some stuffy old dude. What does it mean to be a summoner? Yeah, Wakka said with a nod, his voice quieter than usual, like speaking too loud might wake the village. Well, it's the start of a pilgrimage. Big deal, yeah? Lots to figure out, plans to make. Lulu takes care of most of that stuff, but I gotta be there to nod at the right times, you know? Tidus gave a low chuckle, not really knowing the full picture of what was going on, but at this point he was too tired to press for details. He followed Wakka down the sloping path toward the cluster of huts, the air thick with salt and damp earth. Besaid slept around them, only a few faint hints of light glowing from cracks in doors where candles were still burning low. Wakka pointed toward one of the huts, the roof sagging slightly on one side. That one's mine. You can crash there tonight. Tidus hesitated. You sure? Wakka shrugged. Hey, what's mine is yours, brother, long as you don't snore too loud. Ha ha! He grinned. I'll be back after I check with the gang. Just make yourself comfortable, yeah? Tidus gave a weak laugh. Comfortable might be a stretch. Wakka just slapped him lightly on the back and strolled off, heading back toward the temple without another word. Tidus watched him go, then sighed and stooped through the low entrance of the hut. Inside, the moonlight streamed through the gaps in the walls and the weaving of the thatched roof, casting patterns across the floor and the few pieces of furniture crammed into the small space. There wasn't much. A narrow bed against one wall, a chest with mismatched carvings near the foot of it, and a pile of clothes shoved haphazardly into the corner. A battered old blitzball sat by the door, its surface cracked from years of use. Tidus sat down on the bed, the woven mat softly taking his weight, and exhaled slowly. The whole hut smelled faintly of sweat, with just a trace of something herbal, like dried leaves that had been left too long in the sun. The moonlight brushed over his bare arms as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He felt like a rubber band stretched too tight. So much had happened in such a short time, but none of it fit together. Sin, Zanarkand, that girl, the summoner, who looked nothing like the wise old sage he'd imagined. If he had to guess, he didn't think she was any older than he was. He rubbed his face with both hands and lay back, staring up at the ceiling. Through a small gap in the thatch, the stars peeked down at him, impossibly clear and sharp against the dark sky. The familiar hum of Zanarkand's machinery, the ever-present neon glow, all of it was gone. There was just the sea breeze and the occasional creak of palm fronds swaying in the wind. He closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Images flashed behind his eyelids. Riku and her sunny disposition, his mother's face, distant and sad. Jecht's booming laugh, always just a little too loud. Auron's calm, cryptic words, and Sin, its impossible size, the sheer wrongness of it making his skin crawl even in memory. All of it churned together, leaving him restless and aching for answers. At some point, the sky outside began to change, the deep blue softening into a hazy lavender. The first faint sounds of the village stirring reached his ears, the creak of doors, quiet conversations, the rhythmic slap of something being washed in a basin. Roosters crowed somewhere down the path, their calls echoing off the cliffs. The door creaked open and Waka shuffled inside, hair even more of a mess than usual, his eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. "Man, I'm bushed," he mumbled, dropping into the mat beside Titus's feet without ceremony. "Been up all night. Guardian's got to plan the pilgrimage as soon as the summoner completes their training." Titus sat up, scratching his back. "How's she doing, anyway?" Waka yawned, rubbing his eyes. "She's resting at the temple. Won't be too long till they announce it to the village. Everyone'll come out for that. Big deal, you know." Titus just nodded, not sure what to say, his brain still foggy. Waka squinted at him, catching the bags under his eyes. "You didn't sleep either, huh?" Titus shook his head. "Too much on my mind." Waka chuckled, tossing a small pillow at him. "Well, you got all day to figure stuff out. I'm crashing." He flopped down on the mat, his head barely hitting the pillow, before soft snores filled the air. Titus stood and stepped carefully over his new, friend? Guide? He wasn't sure yet. Waka seemed too easygoing to be real, but maybe that's just how people were here. Stepping out of Waka's hut, Titus glanced around to get his bearings. The other huts, built from woven palm and wood, were humble but sturdy, their weathered walls brightened by shells, hanging charms, and bits of colourful cloth tied to doorways. The village wasn't big, just a close-knit cluster of homes pressed together between the sea and the cliffs, as if Besaid itself was huddled in on itself for safety. Besaid woke slowly around Titus, the village easing into the day with the kind of quiet rhythm that only came from places where time wasn't rushed. Smoke drifted from the low thatched huts, curling in lazy spirals. The wood smoke, the drying of herbs, the smell of it all clung to the breeze. Villagers moved through their morning routines, washing, cooking, chatting in low voices. Titus noticed the odd raised eyebrow in his direction. He suspected at his clothes, perhaps, when a small voice reached his ears. "Hey! Hey, mister!" The shout rang out just before a wild-haired child skidded to a stop in front of him, bare feet coated in dust, a loose cloth tied at their waist. A scruffy, sand-coloured dog darted to Titus's side, sniffing eagerly at his boots. "You're the guy that fell out of the sky, right?" The kid's eyes shone with excitement, bouncing on their toes like they couldn't hold still. Titus crouched, ruffling the dog's ears. "Something like that." "Grandma says you came from Sin, but Benny," the kid thumbed at the dog, "says you smell like the sea. So which is it?" Titus gave the dog a scratch under the chin. "Definitely the sea." The kid nodded, apparently satisfied with this compromise. "Everyone's talking about you. Grandma said the whole village knew before the sun even came up." "That fast, huh?" Titus chuckled. "Super fast," they said, before turning to leave, stopping and turning back to Titus to give him a slightly jilted and awkward version of the prayer, before they spun on their heel and tore off down the path, Benny barking after them. Titus watched them go, half envious of just how little kids need to worry about. The large purple tent of the Crusaders' Lodge stood a little apart from the rest of the village. Canvas sides patched with scraps of mismatched cloth. It felt separate for a reason, not quite part of the village's gentle flow, standing like a reminder that trouble could arrive at any time. Titus found himself making his way over to the tent. At least Luzu and Gata were there, familiar faces in a sea of strangers. Inside the tent was dim, sunlight filtering through seams in the canvas. The smell inside was sharp like leather. The tent extended into a rear portion, which, Titus could tell from the shadows, was surrounded on all sides by trees. Perhaps for defensive purposes, he thought, but what was there to defend from in such an idyllic place such as Besaid? Rows of narrow beds lined the back, some empty, some occupied, with boots and gear strewn underneath. A long table in the centre of the front portion of the tent was cluttered with half-folded maps, bowls with the remains of breakfast, and a few weapons left within arm's reach. Luzu stood at the table, adjusting the straps of his leather cuirass. The Crusader's faded crimson emblem stretched across his chest. His bare arms, scarred and tanned, moved with practiced efficiency, like he had done this a million times before. Beside him, Gata stood a little too stiffly, his newer breastplate almost too polished, boots freshly cleaned, every bit of the overeager recruit trying to look ready for action. "Ah, look who's awake. Figured we'd see you before long," Luzu said, rapping his knuckles against the scarred wooden table with an easy grin. His red hair, tied back in a loose ponytail, hung damp with sweat from the morning heat already. "You hungry?" Titus opened his mouth to reply, but his stomach beat him to it, letting out a loud, traitorous growl that echoed embarrassingly through the tent. Luzu laughed, the kind of laugh that didn't bother hiding its amusement. "That settles it, then." Without waiting for a response, he grabbed a wooden bowl from a crate near the table, dipping a ladle into a wide pot set over a low, smouldering cook fire. The thick stew inside was a mix of rice, some sort of flaky white fish, and bright green vegetables Titus didn't recognize. Simple and hearty, the kind of meal made to fuel long days on patrol. Luzu placed a heavy wooden bowl in front of Titus, along with a worn, splintered spoon. "Eat up," he said, sliding into one of the seats at the long table in the center of the room. Titus settled onto the bench beside Gata, who was now seated and already halfway through his own portion, eating with stiff, mechanical efficiency. The stew smelled better than Titus expected. Rich fish broth, soft rice and vegetables, cooked until they were tender but not mushy. It was simple, but after everything he'd been through, it was practically gourmet. From the back section of the tent, past a hanging curtain that separated the sleeping area, came a gruff, gravelly voice that carried easily across the room. "Luzu, tell me you're not feeding our breakfast to some Albed stray." Titus frowned at the sound, and Luzu didn't even bother to look up from his bowl. "Relax, Jordo. He's not Albed." There was a loud, exaggerated snort. Looks like one." The voice, Jordo, apparently, muttered darkly. "Dressed like a bloody machina worshipper, if you ask me." Titus's brow furrowed. Before he could open his mouth, the curtain was shoved aside with a thick arm, and Jordo himself leaned forward from his bed to get a better look. Broad-chested, with a round belly and thick arms that rested across the bandages covering his chest, Jordo's face was mustached, beaded with sweat, with short black hair clumped unevenly and just speckled with a hint of grey. His sharp, squinting eyes raked Titus up and down, his mouth curling in clear suspicion. Titus, spoon still in hand, sat there under Jordo's scrutiny until it got unbearable. "I'm not Albed," he said, louder than he meant to. Jordo grunted, leaning back into his pillows with a wince. "Is that so? Good. Can't trust those bastards. Always sneaking around, tinkering with their damn machina, stirring up trouble where they don't belong." Luzu gave Titus a look. Not quite apologetic, but somewhere between ignore him and don't make it worse. "Anyway," he said, voice lighter, then gestured with his spoon. "Titus, meet Jordo, former captain of the Besaid Crusaders, and the reason we go through bandages faster than Waka goes through blitzballs." From his bed, Jordo let out a long, exaggerated snort, his belly shaking beneath the bandages. "Gotta stay active in retirement, don't I? Can't let you kids have all the fun." His grin stretched wide, though the way he shifted his weight made it clear that fun had left him laid up more than once. This latest batch jumped me just off the trail east of the village. Nasty little buggers. Nearly took my leg off before I drove them off. Titus nodded slowly, still trying to process the shift from open hostility to exaggerated storytelling. Fiends, huh? Jordo grinned wide, teeth showing. Besaids are naturally quiet, but you get the occasional pack crawling in from the jungle. Not usually this aggressive, though. Must be all this summoner business stirring things up. Or maybe, he said, his eyes fixing on Tidus, it's got something to do with the young non-Albed kids washing up on the beach. Luzu, not interested in letting the conversation drift back to Albed paranoia, nudged Tidus's bowl with his spoon. Eat before he starts giving you his whole life story. Tidus, deciding it was safer to focus on food, took a cautious bite. The broth was comforting, the rice soaking up the salty richness, and the vegetables gave it just enough texture to keep it interesting. He was halfway through his second bite when Jordo's voice cut across the room again. Besides, where exactly did you wash up from? Jordo's tone was still edged with suspicion, though now it was laced with curiosity too. Your clothes sure as hell don't look like you're from around here. Tidus paused, glancing down at himself. His Zanarkand blitzball outfit, yellow half jacket hanging off one shoulder, clashing with dark shorts, one leg longer than the other, and boots built more for show than comfort, probably did look strange next to Luzu and Gata's practical leather and cloth. His whole outfit screamed blitzball star, not stranded survivor. Zanarkand, Tidus said automatically, though the word felt almost strange coming out of his mouth now. Jordo's face twisted into something between a laugh and a scoff. Zanarkand, you say? He repeated, shaking his head. Sure, and I'm High Summoner Braska. Tidus's mouth opened to ask who that was, but Luzu cut in smoothly, his voice calm. Sin's toxin, Luzu said. Scrambled his memory a bit. Happens. Jordo grunted, clearly not convinced, but seemed willing to let it slide. Sin's toxin, you say? Right. Convenient. Gata, either oblivious to or pointedly ignoring the tension, set his empty bowl aside and folded his hands neatly in his lap. You said you got caught in Sin's attack, right? Tidus scratched at the back of his neck. Yeah, I think so. The memories were still a mess of water, screaming, and flashes of light. It's all pretty hazy. Sin's like that, Jordo called from the back, shifting with a grunt. Scrambles your brain, plays tricks with your eyes. You're lucky you didn't end up dead, or worse. Tidus wasn't sure what he wanted to know what worse meant. Luzu leaned back, arms crossed loosely over his chest. The strange part, he said, is that if Sin really was close enough to drop you here, we should have seen something. But so far, nothing outside the odd fiend attack. Tidus found himself desperately wanting to change the subject. So, what do you guys actually do? The Crusaders, I mean. Gata straightened, spine stiffened with pride as if he'd been called to action. We're Spira's first defenders against Sin, he declared. The Order's been around for centuries, back when we were called the Crimson Blades. We're stationed near every major temple and village, ready to fight wherever fiends or Sin show up. Centuries, huh? Tidus raised an eyebrow. So, you haven't beaten it yet? The table went quiet. Even Jordo's chuckle faded. It's not that simple, Luzu said, eventually, his voice quieter. We steer it away. That's the best anyone's ever managed. He looked around to Gata and back to Jordo, but neither of them particularly wanted to contribute anything further. Gata's eyes were in his lap, his lips forming a thin line. Jordo had suddenly found a wrinkle on his bedsheet to be particularly fascinating, and focused on it when he suddenly spoke up. A couple years ago, an island a few miles away from here, I saw the thing. Monstrous. Simply monstrous. He shook his head, as if remembering something he really didn't want to. We evacuated as many as we could, but in the end, we couldn't do a damn thing against the beast. I remember looking back from the boat, the whole island just sank. Houses, people, all swallowed by the sea. The silence that followed was heavier than it had any right to be. After what felt like years, Jordo huffed a breath, shaking himself out of it, and clapped a hand against his belly. Enough doom and gloom over breakfast. His eyes twinkled, though the edge of suspicion never fully left his face. So, tell me, what's the washed-up outsider planning to do now, huh? Titus was definitely put on the back foot by the speed at which Jordo recovered from remembering the horrors of sin. He stirred the stew with a spoon. Waka's roped me into playing in some blitzball tournament in, Luca, I think? He tried to say lightheartedly. Jordo's belly laugh filled the tent, rattling the walls. I don't believe it. The Aurochs are so desperate they're dragging in strays off the beach now. Oh, Yevon, help us. He wiped at one eye, still grinning. Can't say I blame them, though. Those poor bastards haven't won a match since I joined the Crusaders. Even Gata's usually serious expression cracked into a brief grin. Luzu gave Titus a good-natured pat on the shoulder. If Waka's got you signed up for that, I guess you'll be coming with us tomorrow. Titus frowned. With you? Yeah, Luzu said. Now that Besaid Summoner has completed her trial, we'll be escorting her to the mainland. There's a pit stop at a neighboring island, but we land at Luca. Before Titus could really process that, a voice rang out from somewhere outside the tent. Calm, steady, and familiar even through the tent walls. People of Besaid. Even Jordo straightened a little. Titus recognized Brother Rian's voice immediately. Let it be known, Besaid's new summoner has emerged from her communion with the faith. Please gather to greet the new hope of Spira, Lady Yuna. Titus's head snapped up at the name. Yuna. So that was her name. Luzu stood, brushing off his hands. That's our cue. Gata had already opened the tent flap, adjusting the strap across his chest. Yes, sir. Jordo's hand waved lazily from his bed. Oh, you lot go on. Tell her old Jordo is praying a little extra. She could use all the luck she can get. The three of them, Gata, Luzu, and Titus, filed out of the Crusaders' lodge into the brightening square. The village was already coming to life, with people gathering in small clusters, murmuring quietly amongst themselves. The air was thick with anticipation and gossip. Titus's gaze wandered past the crowd, catching the briefest flash of bright ginger hair just before a muscular arm hooked him into a headlock from the side. Wait till you see this, brother! Waka's voice boomed right in his ear, more excitement than volume. Titus wriggled uselessly. I can't see anything with you doing this. Right. Waka let go, giving Titus's head an affectionate shake before strolling off toward the temple steps. He tossed a quick wink over his shoulder before awkwardly jogging past Brother Rian, who conspicuously pretended not to see him, his gaze never shifting from the temple doors. Waka slid to a halt just beside the doors, arms folded across his chest like a self-appointed bouncer. He stood there, bouncing on the balls of his feet, until the ancient stone creaked open. The first to emerge was the blue-furred, halberd-wielding guardian, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, every step deliberate and heavy with authority. He had a slightly jagged shadow across his face at all times due to the broken horn on his forehead. His feline eyes swept the gathering villagers, making sure there was no threat in this place of peace. Titus felt the hairs on the back of his neck prick up when those eyes landed on him for just a half-second longer than anywhere else. Right behind him glided Lulu, her dark braids brushing her back, her belt-woven dress whispering against the stone. Even in the golden light of morning, her presence felt cool, her expression unreadable, crimson eyes flicking over the crowd, always watching, always calculating. They both stepped to the side, and then she appeared. Yuna. She was shorter than Lulu, her delicate frame somehow made even smaller by the sheer vastness of the temple doors behind her. Her white and lavender robes fluttered lightly in the breeze, the gold sash at her waist catching the light with every step. Her staff, held firmly in both hands, was topped with a half-dozen slender rings that clinked softly as she moved, like distant chimes swaying in the wind. She stepped forward, her pace slow, each movement careful, as though each footfall carried significance Titus couldn't grasp. She was nothing like the trembling girl who'd staggered from the cloister the night before. Now she was composed. Nervous, maybe, but standing tall, her face set with quiet determination. The villagers erupted into tears at her appearance, applause ringing out through the square as Yuna descended the steps, her guardians trailing just a few paces behind. Brother Rian, face impassive as ever, stepped to the side and bowed deeply, as if this part of the ceremony belonged to her alone. The crowd gradually parted as Yuna reached the center of the village square, her guardians forming a loose triangle behind her. The cheers faded into quiet, reverent silence. Titus caught the faintest flicker of uncertainty on Yuna's face, her fingers tightening just slightly on her staff, her eyes flicking back over her shoulder. Waka caught her glance and, true to form, gave her the broadest grin and a comically oversized thumbs up, the kind that could have been seen from the beach. Yuna's mouth quirked up at the corner, just briefly, before she turned forward again. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to herself, or maybe to him, then raised her staff. Titus could only call what she did next a dance. She moved with graceful, practiced ease, tracing sweeping patterns in the air with her staff, the rings clinking softly as she followed her motions. The sleeves billowed as she turned, the fabric catching the light like water reflecting the sky. The whole thing should have felt awkward or forced, but it didn't. It was beautiful, purposeful. Every movement felt like part of something ancient. Titus found himself mesmerized by the way her dress caught the air, flowing like liquid silk around her feet. But then something else, something impossible, pulled his attention away. The ground beneath Yuna began to glow. At first, just faintly, thin, winding threads of brilliant white light tracing patterns Titus couldn't begin to understand. The patterns grew sharper, brighter as her staff moved faster. When she finally brought the rings of the staff down to touch the earth, the patterns erupted into beams of pure light that shot straight into the sky. The crowd gasped in awe, but Titus's eyes followed the light, squinting into the rising sun. The beams climbed higher and higher like fireworks, piercing the clouds like spears of liquid fire. For a moment, they seemed to fuse together, twisting and spiraling, forming something larger, something alive. The light hurtled back toward the village, faster than any blitzball Titus had ever seen, and just when he thought it would smash into the ground like a falling star, it unfurled wings. The creature that descended was like nothing Titus had ever seen, enormous, with leathery bat-like wings that stretched wide, catching the morning sun. Its body was both sleek and feathered, its crimson mane bristling as it landed with a grace that seemed at odds with its size. Its talons touched the ground with a delicate scrape, wings folding in against its sides as it lowered its serpentine neck. By all rights, Titus should have been terrified. The sheer presence of it, this thing, this being, was enough to make the air feel heavier. But instead of fear, all Titus could feel was a strange, gentle calm radiating from it. Gata gasped at the sight of the beast, but Luzu gave a low whistle, which itself felt loud in the now silent crowd. "I've only ever heard stories of aeons," he said quietly. "Never thought I'd actually get to see one." Una stepped forward, her hand lifting to rest gently against the creature's beak. The crowd's silence was absolute. The beast closed its eyes at her touch, bowing its head slightly, and Una leaned forward, pressing her forehead against it with a reverence that felt almost private. It was a moment not meant for anyone else, a conversation spoken without words, too sacred for interruption. The villagers didn't cheer this time. They watched in quiet awe as Summoner and Aeon stood together in the heart of the square, a bond visible even to an outsider like Titus. After a moment, Una took a single step back from the creature, her hand slowly lowering from its beak. The Aeon stood still for a moment longer, its wings partially extended, as though reluctant to leave. Then, with a gentle nod from Una, no words needed, it gave one powerful flap of its wings, kicking up a swirl of dust and flower petals from the square. The crowd gasped softly, watching as the great beast rose into the sky, each beat of its wings pushing it higher until it was just a speck against the brilliant blue. And then it was gone, dissolving into the sky as though it had never been there at all. For a heartbeat, there was silence, awe holding everyone in place before the entire village erupted into wild applause. Cheers, claps, and whistles filled the air, the energy infectious even to Titus, who had no idea what he'd just witnessed. Una stood at the center of it all, cheeks flushed but her smile radiant. Her hands were clasped together, fingers tight around her staff, as though holding herself steady in the face of all the attention. Her guardians were the first to reach her. Lulu, her usual cool exterior melting for a moment, wrapped Una in a hug, her dark sleeves enveloping her completely. There was a whispered word, too soft for Titus to catch from all the way over here, before Lulu stepped back, her hands resting lightly on Una's shoulders, pride and protectiveness mingling in her gaze. Waka arrived next, full of his usual energy, clapping Una on the back, hard enough to make her stumble forward a step. "Ha! That's our summoner!" His grin stretched from ear to ear, unrestrained and utterly genuine. "You nailed it, yeah!" Una just laughed, soft and breathless. "Thank you, Waka." Titus, still trying to process what he'd just seen, leaned closer to Luzu. "Okay, seriously, what was that thing?" Luzu folded his arms against his chest, his expression thoughtful but not particularly knowledgeable. "They call them aeons," he said. "Only summoners can call them. Spirits of the faith, or something like that." Titus blinked. "The what now?" Luzu gave him a wry smile. "Don't ask me for details. That's all temple stuff. We just fight fiends. But what I do know is that they protect the summoner, like another guardian." He went back to clapping along with the crowd and gave a whistle. Titus rubbed the back of his neck, thinking that a summoner's pilgrimage must be a very important thing if they need that much protection. He was still trying to make sense of it all when Waka jogged over, weaving easily through the crowd until he reached Titus, Gata, and Luzu. "Yo, brother!" Waka slapped Titus on the shoulder. "I gotta go help Una with some preparations for tomorrow. You know, pilgrimage stuff. Gonna be gone for a while." Titus didn't even have time to respond before Waka kept going. "You should catch some sleep, yeah? You look ready to keel over. Titus was about to protest, but his knees, heavy as lead after what felt like a lifetime without rest, made the decision for him. Yeah, okay. Sleep sounds good. Besides, Walker added, grinning, there's gonna be a send-off party tonight. You're gonna want to be rested for that. Titus glanced back toward Una, now surrounded by villagers offering praise and blessings, and found himself wondering if he would get the chance to talk to her before they left. It wasn't just curiosity. There was something about her, a presence. Her composure, maybe even the slight nervousness she'd shown before Walker's ridiculous thumbs up, that made him want to say, well, something. He wasn't sure what. He was so preoccupied with the thought, he almost forgot to respond. A party? Sounds great. Can't wait, he said, trying his best to casually put his hands on his hips in an easygoing pose. Yeah, that's the spirit. Walker gave him a thumbs up before jogging back toward Una, his usual bounce in every step. The crowd was already starting to disperse, villagers drifting off in twos and threes, voices buzzing with excitement over what they'd just seen. Titus caught snippets as he passed, praise for Una, wonder at the beauty of the Aeon, a few whispered prayers to Yevon for the summoner's safe journey. It was clear that what had just happened wasn't normal. It was special, something to be remembered. Titus trudged his way back to Walker's hut, the sun warm on his back, the murmur of the village fading as the adrenaline that had carried him this far finally wore off. Every step felt heavier than the last, and by the time he reached the hut, the bed looked more inviting than anything he'd seen in days. He collapsed onto it without ceremony, not even bothering to pull off his boots. Memories of the Aeon flashed in his mind, its wings, its speed, the way it seemed to communicate non-verbally with Una. Una. Titus couldn't put his finger on it, but something about her lingered in his mind as the sounds of the village faded into the background. Laughter, footsteps, the distant cry of a gull, all washing over him like a gentle surf, until at last sleep dragged him under. The sun was already dipping low by the time Titus stirred from his nap, the warm light spilling in through the gaps in Walker's hut. Rest had helped, at least a little, though the fog of exhaustion still clung to him like salt on his skin. With nothing better to do, he'd spent the evening wandering the village, letting his feet lead him nowhere in particular. Most of the time, he ended up back at the Crusaders' Lodge, where Luzu and Gata were more than happy to let him hang around, swapping stories about training mishaps and fiend encounters. The easy company had helped ground him, even if he was still no closer to understanding where or possibly when he was. But as the sky faded into deep purple and the first stars began to blink awake, the sound of music and laughter drew him back toward the village square. A bonfire crackled and popped, sending sparks drifting lazily into the night sky, with a smell of grilled fish filling the square where, just hours before, Una had summoned the Aeon. Now the place was alive with laughter, music, and the rhythmic beating of drums. Villagers danced in circles, hands clasped, their feet kicking up puffs of dirt as they spun around the flames. Titus hovered near the edge of it all, the warmth of the fire and the lively atmosphere making it impossible not to smile. His nap had cleared some of the fog from his head, but not the nagging weight of too many questions left unanswered. Before he could get too deep into his own head, Walker's arm, once around, clamped around his shoulders, hauling him bodily toward a cluster of men standing near a table piled high with grilled skewers and half-empty mugs of something that smelled vaguely fruity. "You've really got an issue with personal space, don't you, big guy?" Titus said with fake annoyance. Walker ignored him. "Let me introduce you to the team, brother," he said, all grins and infectious energy. He turned to the group, raising his voice just enough to be heard over the music. "This guy wants into the tournament so bad, I let him on the team. His memory's a little fuzzy, so if he says anything weird, Just roll with it, yeah? The team all turned to Titus with grins ranging from curious to mischievous. Well, well, if it ain't the Zanarkand superstar, said one of them, a bald guy with a wide grin and a sunburnt scalp that gleamed in the firelight. Titus groaned, already rubbing his face. You guys heard about that, huh? Heard it? We were there, brother, the bald player said. Name's Dado, by the way. Titus gave a small nod. Nice to meet you. Again. Next to Dado, a player with short, tight hair and the beginnings of stubble along his jaw gave a friendly shrug. Name's Letty, midfielder. Guess we didn't exactly do proper introductions when you were coughing up seawater. Titus laughed. Fair point. Another player stepped forward, dark-skinned, with close-cropped blonde hair, his face marked by two bold lines of tribal paint running down each cheek. Jasu, defense. He offered Titus a fist, and Titus bumped it without thinking. Bata, said a voice from the side, belonging to a red-haired player whose slightly crooked nose was adorned with a band-aid, like it had been broken and reset more than once. Defense too, though with our record that's more of a suggestion than a position, I guess. The group laughed, but it was the broadest player, still wiping his fingers on his shorts from the grilled fish he just inhaled, who gave a short wave. Hey, how's it going? I'm keeper, and I'm the keeper, he said, swallowing another mouthful of fish. And my new strategy is, if I can't block the ball coming in, block the goal. That got a well-meaning laugh from the rest of the team as Keeper patted his belly. He wasn't exactly on Jordo's level, but it was impressive nonetheless. If impressive was even the right word, Titus wondered. Hey, Walker cut in, clapping his hands to get their attention. Hey, we gotta stop talking like that, yeah? New team, new plan, new attitude. Titus glanced around the circle. They were scrappy, no doubt, a bunch of guys from a tiny island team who had never tasted victory. But there was something warm about them, too. They weren't pros, but they were tight. A real team, win or lose. So, Titus said, grinning, what's our goal? The Aurochs all glanced at each other, looking like they weren't sure if this was a trick question. Well, Letty cleared his throat. You always said the most important thing is that we do our best and we have fun. Nope, Walker declared, interrupting him and pumping his fist in the air. We got a new goal now. Our goal is victory. To win every match, to defeat every opposing team, and to bring the Crystal Cup back to Besaid. That's all we gotta do, easy, huh? There was a beat of silence after Walker's declaration. The only sound, the crackle of the bonfire and the distant rhythmic pulse of the hand drum drifting through the square. The Aurochs glanced at each other, uncertain. It was a bold goal, leagues beyond anything they'd dared say aloud before. Wait, you serious? Datto asked, brow raised. Victory? Like, actually winning? Titus got the sense he was half joking. "You damn right I'm serious," Walker grinned, clapping his hands together once. "New player, new attitude, like I said. We ain't going just to show up. We going to win." The hesitation lingered only a moment longer. Then Jasu slapped Bota on the back. Letty let out a whoop, and suddenly the whole team was grinning, their doubts swept away in Walker's infectious enthusiasm. Their first chants were uneven, half laughing, half shouting, but soon they found the beat, falling into time with the lively drumming floating from across the square. Victory! 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 The chant became part of the party itself, blending with the music, the beat of their fists in the air matching the rhythm of the dancers' feet pounding the earth. Titus couldn't help but smile, caught up in the energy, even if part of him wondered just how much of that dream was actually possible. The chant eventually fizzled out into laughter and teasing shoves, the team drifting apart to grab more food and drinks. Titus stepped back from the circle, the heat of the bonfire warming his face, and let his gaze drift across the square. That's when he saw her. Una sat a little off to the side, beneath the soft glow of a hanging lantern. A small group of elderly villagers sat with her, offering quiet words of blessing or advice. A young child lay curled up beside her, head resting against her knee, fast asleep despite the noise around them. Tidus's gaze lingered on her, the gentle way she bowed her head when the elders spoke, the quiet strength in the way her hands rested lightly on her staff. There was something about her, something that pulled him. Almost before he realized what he was doing, he found himself walking toward her, slowing his steps as he approached, the warmth of the bonfire at his back fading as he reached the quieter edge of the square. Una sat cross-legged on a woven mat, her staff resting beside her, the silver rings at its head catching the lantern light as it swayed slightly in the breeze. The sound of a throat clearing sharply cut through the air. Brother Rian stood a little way off, his hands clasped before him, his expression carefully neutral. There was no outright hostility, but the coolness in his gaze as it flicked to Tidus was enough to make the message clear. He was not welcome here. Before Tidus could say anything, an older woman beside Una leaned slightly toward her, whispering something too quiet for him to catch. She didn't look at him, but her posture stiffened, as though his presence alone was enough to sour her mood. "He is a heathen. He shouldn't be here," she said softly, the words meant only for Una, but loud enough to carry. Tidus took a half-step back, blinking in surprise. Before he could decide whether to defend himself or just slink away, a smaller, sharper voice rang out. "You're a bad man!" The kid who had been resting their head on Una's lap was now awake, and Tidus could see it was the same kid from earlier, the one who'd been chasing the dog, Benny. He now sat there with his arms crossed defiantly, his face scrunched into a frown of pure disapproval. Una's head lifted sharply. "Please," she said, standing in a soft rustle of fabric, her voice clear but gentle. "It's all right." Brother Rian opened his mouth to object, but Una was already stepping forward, her sandals clip-clopping slightly against the packed dirt as she approached Tidus. Up close, she was smaller than he remembered, the formal grace she'd worn outside the temple replaced by something softer, still poised but not so untouchable. She offered a polite, almost hesitant smile. "I'm Una," she said, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, fingers curling and uncurling against the fabric of her sleeve. "Thank you for helping me earlier." Tidus blinked. "Oh, hi. What are you talking about?" "At the temple," she said, her smile turned sheepish. "I was gone so long. I made everyone worry. It's no surprise someone came to look for me." The easy explanation caught Tidus off guard, and a smarter man might have run with it. Instead, he scratched at the back of his neck, glancing briefly at Brother Rian, who was still watching with a sharp-eyed suspicion like a hawk. "Right, yeah, about that," Tidus said. "I'm sorry. I know I wasn't supposed to go in there." He gave a half-hearted gesture toward the villagers who were still eyeing him with varying degrees of suspicion. "Guess that's why they're all so happy to see me. This Yevon business is pretty serious, I guess." Una's smile didn't falter, though her gaze flicked briefly toward Brother Rian, as if she could feel the weight of his stare, too. "But Tidus shifted awkwardly, his own words making him cringe even as they left his mouth. "I kinda got lost." He regretted saying it instantly. She'd practically handed him the perfect excuse, and instead he'd made himself sound like even more of an idiot. Desperate for a lifeline, he blurted, "Anyway, I saw that thing. The Aeon. That was incredible." Una's eyes lit up, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. "You really think so?" Tidus gave a quick, honest nod. "It was amazing." A little of the earlier tension faded from her face. Do you think... Her fingers brushed the smooth wood of her staff. Do you think I could really become a High Summoner? The question caught him off guard. It was so earnest and uncertain, and for some reason, it felt strange coming from someone who just called down a godlike creature from the sky. Tidus didn't hesitate. Yeah, absolutely. Her smile grew, just for a moment, before a small tug at her sleeve drew her attention. The kid from earlier had crept back over, Benny now trotting happily at his side, all hostility apparently forgotten. Lady Una, come play with me some more. Una knelt slightly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, her expression fond. Soon, okay? The boy nodded, grinning, and darted off, leaving Una standing there, her sleeve swaying gently as she turned back to Tidus. So, her voice was softer now, less formal. Tomorrow, then. Tidus blinked. Tomorrow? She smiled, the expression both excited and a little wistful. We're on the same boat, right? To Luca. Oh, yeah, Tidus said, forcing a grin. Right. Her smile held for a second longer before her gaze drifted past him, to the fire and the dancing villagers beyond. We can talk more then, she said, her voice light. You can tell me all about Zanarkand. Tidus's grin flickered, his stomach twisting just a little. Not because she mentioned Zanarkand, but because she said it like she believed it existed. Like it wasn't just some story. Sure, he said, a little too quickly. Sounds good. Una gave a small, polite bow, then turned back toward the mat where the elders were waiting, their expressions carefully schooled into neutral politeness, though Tidus could feel Brother Rian's disapproval like a physical weight in the air. Tidus stood there for a moment, watching her settle back into place among them, her hands folding gracefully in her lap, the firelight tracing gentle gold along the edges of her sleeves. The sound of drums and laughter welcomed him back into the heart of the village square, the bonfire still crackling high into the night sky. The party was still going strong, though a few of the younger kids had already conked out near the edges, curled up in laps or under blankets where their parents talked and laughed above them. Waka was easy to spot, leaning against a barrel, one arm resting casually on top, his expression unusually relaxed as he watched Tidus wander back over. He gave him a knowing grin, his voice low and easy. Hey, she's pretty cute, huh? Tidus felt his mouth twitch into a smile, not even bothering to deny it. Yeah, she is. Waka's grin held, but only for a second before his expression shifted, a little more serious than Tidus expected. Hey, He scratched the back of his neck, not quite meeting Tidus's eyes. Just don't get any ideas, yeah? Tidus blinked. Ideas? His grin turned crooked. What if she comes on to me? Waka snorted. That's a good one. Not gonna happen, brother. He shook his head, but there was no real heat in it, just a layer of protective concern, like someone talking about a younger sister. She's got a big road ahead of her, yeah? A summoner's pilgrimage. It's serious stuff. Tidus lifted his hands, half in surrender, half in teasing. All right, I get it. Good. Waka's grin came back, wide and toothy. Sides, I wasn't even talking about Una. He jerked his chin toward the other side of the bonfire, where a tall, curvy woman with long, dark hair and a bright smile caught his eye. She gave him a slow, exaggerated wink, and Waka's whole posture shifted, puffing out his chest just slightly, the way guys do when they think someone might be watching. Tidus raised an eyebrow. Ah, that's what this is about. Waka clapped him on the back. Maybe you bunk at the Crusaders' Lodge tonight, yeah? His wink was comically obvious. Smooth, Waka. Wocket just chuckled, already jogging off toward his admirer, leaving Titus standing there with the bonfire heat on his face and the smell of grilled fish making his stomach growl. With a shrug, Titus turned toward the food, grabbing a skewer from the table. Whatever tomorrow brought, boats, tournaments, pilgrimages, at least for tonight, there was good food, warm fire, and for the first time in a while, the feeling that maybe things weren't all bad.